Welcome to Drucker on the Dial, a show on leadership and management where timely issues meet timeless principles. Produced by the Drucker Institute at Claremont Graduate University. I'm your host, Phalana Tiller. Today on Drucker on the Dial, we're going to talk with Dov Seidman, the author of the best-selling book, How, who will discuss how organizations can give their workers a maximum amount of autonomy and in the process deliver great results. Dov Seidman, the author of How, Why How We Do Anything Means Everything, is also the founder and CEO of the advisory services firm LRN that helps companies navigate complex legal and regulatory environments and at the same time foster ethical cultures. Recently, LRN produced a study, the How Report, that demonstrated big quantifiable differences in behavior and performance between top-down rules-based organizations and those enterprises in which everyone is guided by a set of core principles and values that inspire everyone to align around a company's mission. This idea of aligning an organization from the bottom up and not through a structure of command and control is right in step with the philosophy of Peter Drucker. Every manager should be held strictly accountable for the results of his performance, Drucker wrote in his 1954 classic, The Practice of Management. But what he does to reach these results, he and only he should control. It should be clearly understood what behavior and methods the company bars as unethical, unprofessional, or unsound. But within these limits, every manager must be free to decide what he has to do. Dov Seidman, welcome to Drucker on the Dial.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Phalana.
So, Dov, most of your work has centered around this question of how companies and people can operate in both a principled and profitable way, I think I read somewhere. And I'm interested for you to tell me and tell our audience about why it is that you focus on this aspect of organizational and personal behavioral culture.
Well, the management guru that preceded Peter Drucker, as far as I'm concerned, was Adam Smith. And when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, while most people think that he was an economist, he was in fact the chairman of the moral philosophy department at Glasgow University. And the promise of capitalism, that human endeavor can result in human progress, and that we can create markets and systems and organizations to do that on a innovative, enduring basis, always took as an assumption that a moral foundation had to be, in fact, the foundation. Now, Don Vito Corleone, the Godfather, became the management guru, this idea that there's a sharp distinction. It's not personal, it's just business. If you can create a separate sphere, it's just business, or in Washington, D.C., it's just politics, or what happens in a Penn State locker room is just football, where we continue to go to funerals and hear that he was a ruthless negotiator but a loving father and a jerk boss but a caring husband. If we can create a separate sphere where it's just business, then greed is good, too big to fail. Just do it, I don't care how, go for the profits any which way, is actually a rational strategy. I've never believed in it, but interestingly, the world is continuing to fuse. It's gone from connected to interconnected to, frankly, morally and ethically interdependent, because we see everyday examples of how we do depend on each other, how we rise and fall together, how one banker at his desk can, through a click, lose $2 billion for his bank and introduce risk into global markets after he's wiped out bonuses for all of his colleagues. And we've also seen how one vegetable vendor in Tunisia, armed with a cell phone camera and a few buddies, can spark revolution towards freedom throughout the entire Middle East.
Right.
So we now live in a world where any individual could be a force for good or the opposite, harm, in ways like never before. And we need to reconnect to the moral foundation of capitalism and understand that principled performance, doing the right things the right way, is the only performance that really can deliver the performance that we want and that can endure. And it was Peter Drucker that reminded us that there is a profound difference between doing things right and doing the right things. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said there's a difference between doing that which you have a right to do and that which is right to do. And I think that we scaled institutions based on let's understand what laws and regulations expect of us, and let's get people to understand what they can and can't do and use carrots and sticks to govern and regulate around that. But after that, just go for it. And I think that that's going to flip and come back to where it started with let's do the right things the right way, and that's the only way.
You brought up the concept of results and what it is that comes out of an effort.
Yeah.
Tell us about your how metrics report that was study that you all conducted, and tell us about the framing of that study, what you were looking for, and then what some of the central findings of that study were.
Well, bringing principles and profits back together and putting them in a reinforcing relationship has a lot to do with what we measure, because everybody would agree that what we manage what we measure, or what we measure is what we get. And in all walks of society and life and in business, I mean, we are obsessed with measurement. I embrace that myself. But the measurements that we we spent 2 years debating how much stimulus do we need. Is it $1 trillion, $1.2 trillion, 800 billion, and not how are we going to stimulate the economy and society? You know, what journey are we going on? What daring, adventurous journey? Yeah. Heads of HR talk about how much resource do we need to accomplish this, not how are we going to be resourceful or resilient.
Right.
It's how much GDP, it's how much debt can our balance sheets really accommodate, and how much revenue, how much profits into this quarter. And in the new economy, it's how many friends, how many followers, how many click-throughs and page views. And we're obsessed with how much. Well, Netflix was tracking how much quite beautifully. They were tracking how many subscribers they were adding in unprecedented levels. They felt powerful based on that how much, so they decided to increase their price marginally. And 800,000 subscribers bolted in 48 hours and crashed the stock. Now, when was the last time we saw 800,000 people collectively in unison go in the same direction? Well, that's what's happening in this interconnected world. So I believe that as the world becomes interdependent, going on this journey can be catalyzed by shifting the metric from always measuring how much to measuring the how. You know, how do we engender trust? What if Netflix understood how loyal were their subscribers, not how many subscribers did they have?
Right.
How do we relate to community, society, future generations? How healthy are the relationships in our ecosystem with suppliers and vendors and government agencies, etc.? So that's what we've done. So we created a framework that really frames the 3 different forces that shape organizational leadership and individual behavior. Governance, the laws, the regulations, the policies, the rules, the checks and balances, the approvals, the quarterly targets, the annual goals. Governance, the corporate hierarchy, the org chart. How a company is governed influences behavior, what we reward, what we discipline. Culture, how things really happen around this place. The values, principles, the legend, the lore, the stories passed one generation to the next. And the other are the leadership models in effect. Is this a command and control, information is shared on a need-to-know basis, or is this a connect and collaborate, transparent form of leadership? And these 3 forces come together to shape behavior. Often they're in a schizophrenic relationship. I can think of the boss that says, I trust you to innovate, and you run off to innovate, and then you need to get 2 signatures to spend $8 to innovate, and you say, wait a minute, you just trusted me to innovate, and now I guess you don't trust me, you're a hypocrite after all. And the person is not. This leader is a genuine leader presiding over a superstructure that's got conflict and tension in it. So against this framework, we've created the ability to really measure how things happen within companies. And we decided to go to the USC Center for Effective Organizations, to the Boston Research Group. They helped found the Rand Center for Behavior Economics, and to RDT, because I really wanted this research to not just be a survey of perceptions and opinions, but in fact we wanted statistical analysis, multivariate regression, segmentation, factor analysis applied to over 2 million observations of actual behavior in large to small companies, for-profit, non-profit, in 18 countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
And we were able to do this, and we received findings that represent good and bad news. The good news is if you can create what we call a values-based self-governing organization, where decisions and behaviors are in fact animated by values and principles, where trust abounds, and based on this trust, people take the risk that enables innovation and progress, where a sense of mission or a purpose-inspired mission is really the why people are getting out of bed and unleashing discretionary effort. if you can create that against 14 business outcomes, employee loyalty, customer satisfaction, receptivity to new idea, innovation, financial performance, you get much more of what you want. In fact, you get how much as an outcome of focusing on the how, and much less of what you don't want, such as less risk, less misconduct. So the good news is we've demonstrated that statistically.
Right.
The bad news is that only 3% of organizations fall into that category. Most fall into either blind obedience, and they are, like it sounds, rigid hierarchies, many sticks, fewer carrots, rule-bound, etc. And then the most popular and prevalent organization is what we call informed acquiescence. People are informed as to what's expected of them. Both carrots and sticks are used, very short-term, success-oriented. Leadership is still command and control and not connect and collaborate, etc. But even though I said this is bad news, it's also good news because I think we're at the beginning of an era, and companies are going on a journey, and that 3% can go higher and higher and higher. And I should add that this also proved to us that it's a solution to what plagues business year after year, which is the employee engagement problem.
Right. Was that figure a surprise to you, though, Dov? Did you expect to find more than 3% that would be considered on the right path?
No, the figure's not a surprise. Look, Chevron just declared itself the human energy company. Cisco just said that it's the human network. And Dow just said that they're the human element. And Deere just said human flourishing. And Ally Bank, as we speak, human. And Samsung at the Olympics just started advertising that they're designed for humans. I mean, companies have always proclaimed to the marketplace that deep down they're not shallow, they stand for things.
Sure, yeah.
But the proclamation has just shifted to a humanistic one.
Okay.
Let's have a relationship in a new sphere that transcends our economic model, how we make money in our products and services, who we are, and what we stand for. Now, that just started, and you know that there's a massive distinction between asserting your excellence and greatness and living it through your practices and individual leadership behaviors.
Sure.
But these companies know that we're in an interdependent world where our humanity must be reawakened and put at the center, and they're going on a journey. Some are going to do it genuinely, some less so, but I think they all understand that in this era of behavior, competitive advantage has shifted to those who get their house right. And I'm not surprised that it's just 3% because we've been reforming and rebooting and resetting our systems. It's not working, and leaders are now courageously saying it's time to rethink fundamentals. Paul Pullman, the CEO of Unilever, just recently said to me, "Hey, Dov, it occurred to me that it took them 17 days to get rid of Mubarak, and Mubarak had a military and tanks, and I don't have a military. How should we think about Unilever and how this company ought to operate if consumers or employees might decide to be vocal about how we run this place?"
Right.
So more and more CEOs are rethinking fundamentals, and this is a CEO that I respect greatly, and the first thing he did when he became CEO is he told Wall Street, no more quarterly guidance. We're going on a journey. It's a journey of thriving. It's a journey of growing phenomenally, but at the same time cutting our environmental impact and footprint by 50%. We're not clear on exactly how we're going to do that, but that's our moonshot, and it's going to depend on our culture really being inspired to being that kind of company, and we're seeing more and more CEOs and leadership teams embark on a journey.
Yeah. Paul is actually speaking at our Global Peter Drucker Forum in November in Vienna, and I look forward to actually engaging with him there about that question. And so I guess I wonder if you have...
You should ask Paul why he's happy telling people that he's rereading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I mean, people pursue meaning outside of work, and I think in this connected world, especially Generation X and Y, they are looking for meaning on the job. And we talk a lot about this jobs crisis. Of course, it's so painful to see so many people without a job. But what do you make of the fact that 7 out of 10 employees who have a job are not engaged? And 2 out of those 7 are sabotaging. They're engaged in sabotage of their companies. That's a careers crisis where so many people who have a job don't feel like they have a career. They don't feel like they're building anything. They're not unleashing and contributing their full character and creativity because they're not inspired.
Right.
Because carrots and sticks might coerce or motivate you, But in this era of behavior, we're now asking for behaviors that cannot be just coerced or motivated. They can only be inspired. Another way to put this to you is, I now wheel my suitcase through airports. I used to carry it. So Toomey and companies like it got me to shift my behavior. It took them years. People said, only flight attendants would be caught dead in an airport wheeling their suitcase.
Right.
Real people carry their suitcases. But now it's the most rational thing. And if you put so they shifted our behavior from carrying to wheeling. If a product goes on sale, they're shifting our behavior. Buy now, not later. We're in the middle of a presidential election where each side is going to spend $1 billion trying to shift a tiny sliver of swing state voters from one camp to the other. And the entire marketplace, if you will, companies, are designed to use mechanisms and mechanics that shift behavior. Right. From here to there, from tomorrow to today, or vice versa. The behaviors that we really are asking for in an interdependent world are not shifted behaviors, but elevated behaviors. Collaborate with people from different cultures. Innovate. When the company's attacked, go on Facebook and the like and defend us honorably. The amount of ideas we're asking of people, the kind of pride, principled decision-making. So we are asking for human elevation. And you can't elevate humanity and behavior with the same mechanisms and approaches that we use to shift it.
Right.
And I think that's why this is a whole new journey. And we know that what elevates people are journeys worthy of their time and dedication, and missions worthy of their commitment, right? And values that really guide and inspire not what they can and can't do, but what Peter Drucker said, doing the right things. In fact, what they should do. Yeah. And only values can really inspire and guide the should. In other words, the right thing.
Tell me what you think then has been in the way. You know, if Adam Smith is talking about this, in the last century, and then Peter Drucker after him, and as you said, a lot of companies are now awakening to this realization that we are in an interdependent society. What is it that's gotten in the way, and why are companies stuck, and how can they get unstuck?
Right. So let me answer the question both in terms of what's gotten in the way and why I'm actually optimistic.
Okay.
All behavior comes from values, and there are two kinds of values. There are situational values, where you do what the situation allows. If I'm in California and I can sell you a mortgage and I think I'll never see you again, and that mortgage could get bundled with 1,000 others and sent halfway across the world, and the Icelandic pension fund is what crashes, I can, so I will. And if it's just business and I'm a good person in my personal life, that's kind of life. And people say that the opposite of morality is not necessarily immorality, but amorality. And I think that these are really good people who think that they're in a sphere, the Nike era of just do it. Think of bosses who told people just get it done, I don't care how.
Right.
So I think that we scaled institutions based on situational values. So here's a situation. You're in a company cafeteria, and there's a sign that says, don't leave the food in the microwave. So people leave the food on the counter because we didn't really scale respect of common places. So you wouldn't leave the food where it doesn't belong anywhere.
Right.
If the compliance program focuses on not money laundering, so someone might go offshore to money launder because they learned in the compliance program why they shouldn't do it onshore. But if we create a culture deeply committed to doing the right thing, they won't think like behaving that way wherever it is they are. So whenever it is we scale rules and policies and carrots and sticks apply to them for specific contexts and situations, but you don't really get people inspired by the spirit of doing the right thing, then you start to get people doing the right thing in a different situation in a different context. And I think that we've scaled situational values.
Okay.
The values that we now need to embed and scale are what I call sustainable values, the ones that literally sustain human relationships. You know you can't have a healthy, enduring, lasting relationship unless its truth is not all over it and in it, and trust and respect, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
How do you think people on an individual or personal level can make the adjustments in their own behavior?
Well, the most important thing is, you can't pay someone for integrity. You can only pay for the behavior that someone with integrity manifests and personifies. So you really need to translate these principles and values into specific behaviors that could become part of performance management. We call it principled performance management, that you can hire for these traits and attributes. So we've got to take this all the way to behavior. And what's inspiring people is not, we used to think of behavior like goalkeeping, preventing goals, or we talk about good behavior. He was let out of prison early for good behavior. We're now seeing that behavior, how we relate to others, how we forge deeper and more meaningful connections, is the source of advantage. Where in the past, what we did used to win the game of business and create lots of wealth and value. Now we need great products and services and innovation, but it just keeps us in the game. But we all want to stand out and be bold and unique and differentiate ourselves. And how we do what we do is something we each get to do uniquely, organizationally and individually. So let's take something that we all want more of, trust. It's this, everybody knows that trust is valued. If we have more trust, people feel more safe to take risks and innovate and collaborate and bring their best game. But right now, our study showed that only 11% of organizations are high in trust. We've been taught to trust and verify, so we set up elaborate systems of distrust. Before we pay expenses, this person has to get 2 signatures, and before we sign a contract with this vendor, we're going to kick their tires for 6 months. So we're inspecting for trust, and we stopped reading Aristotle, another moral philosopher, who pointed out that the virtue of trust lies not in inspecting for it, but in giving it away. Because when you give trust away, the virtue lies in you because you've taken the risk by giving somebody else the power to do right by you or let you down. And that's why this donut vendor that I got a hold of, he trusted his customers to make their own change by putting a tray of loose change on his donut stand, and he outsold the competitor kitty corner 3-1, even though they had an equally fresh and equally priced donut. The rock band Radiohead, when they trusted their fans to pay what they thought the music was worth, made more money in that 5th album than all the other albums when they put a price on it heretofore. Doctors who trust their patients, when they say they're sorry to them, they're in effect admitting by taking responsibility for the harm they cause them. So they're giving the patients the power to go sue them and say, hey, you just said you're sorry. Maybe what are you admitting here? And nonetheless, when doctors trust patients with an apology, they get sued half the times, and their medical malpractice claims drop in half. And in Indonesia, they're fighting corruption at unprecedented levels, and they're teaching society, in addition to having police and controls, to pay on the honor system. You go into honesty cafes, if you will, where you take money off the shelf, and instead of going to a cashier, you put money in a jar and take your own change. So we're starting to see this example in small ways and at scale of giving trust away, trusting employees to take whatever vacation they think they need. At LRN, the company that I founded 18 years ago, we're on our own journey. Last year, people rated their own performance, and we paid bonuses, which is the ultimate act of trust, you could say, based on people's self-rating and not what some supervisor or boss thought of their own performance.
Right, wow.
And it's creating a lot of loyalty and trust. Last thing I'll say on trust is that it's a drug. Neuroscientists have proven that when you feel that someone has extended trust to you, oxytocin is released in your brain, and whatever makes them leery or weary of them subsides or diminishes, and you reciprocate that trust by leaning into the relationship and being trusting yourself.
Yeah, we've been doing some really interesting collaborating with Paul Zak. So
and how I wrote about some Paul Zak experiments a while ago. So I was on to Paul Zak for a while, and I am a real fan of his work.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I have one last question for you, Dov, and it's a question that comes from Peter Drucker's life, one that he was asked by a teacher and that he went on to reflect on the different points in his life. And that is, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered for the journey. I don't think it's my responsibility to finish this job. I think it's more than a lifetime's worth of work, but it is my responsibility to not quit. And I think that trying to underpin behavior of leaders, of institutions and individuals in sustainable values, and that they be guided by principles, I think is a worthy endeavor, and I was at it authentically because I'm BE before Enron. So before it was practical, if not fashionable, to be principled. This is what I got out of bed to do, and I want to be remembered for someone who said, you know what, you can take moral philosophy and apply it to the rough and tumble world, and that you can create value from values. The most ancient philosophical paradox that has always struck me is the paradox of happiness. That if you pursue happiness directly, it will elude you. But if you do something of meaning, that you're passionate about, happiness has a way of finding you. And I created a corollary that if you pursue success directly in business, it will elude you. It won't be sustainable. But if you pursue significance, truly being other regarding, doing business in a way and manifested in products and services and inventions that make a difference in the lives of others, then success ought to find you, and it typically does. I want to be remembered for the pursuit of significance, and success being the ultimate byproduct measure of that.
Wow.
The last thing I'd add is, this word how, which I'm partial to. we've cheapened it, frankly. We've treated it as an adverb. How are you? How's it going, buddy? How am I going to get from A to B? We count with it. How much? We've treated it as an adverb. But what if it were a noun? It's the how that makes the difference. Let's get our hows right. Let's work with them. That's a real how company. I think if we see it as a noun, as a platform of innovation, as an ethic of human endeavor, if it's a thing, we'll invest in it, we'll scale it, we'll do it. So I'd like to bring about a more how world by creating, by helping to inspire and catalyze waves of people that want to innovate in how. We do what we do.
Thanks so much for joining me today on Drucker on the Dial. It's really been a pleasure talking with you, Dov.
It's a real pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to Drucker on the Dial. As always, you can follow our ongoing conversation about leadership and management at our daily blog, The Drucker Exchange, at thedx.org, thedx.org.